And I also was able to, through exploring photography, kind of rediscover this side of me that I wasn't really exploring in science. And that was kind of this artistic storytelling side that I'd had. So by the time I finished my graduate degree and wrote my thesis, which I loved, and I just felt so fortunate to do that, I had kind of already mentally made this shift into, I think I need to get back into storytelling. And meanwhile, I'd been exposed to this a world of freshwater biodiversity, and certainly a lot of the freshwater conservation need that's out there. And not only saw that this is a better use of my skill set, but I think this might be something the world needs a little bit more than my science.
Hey there, Podcast Aquanauts. It's your host, Casey here. It probably comes as no surprise to the kinds of listener that would press play on a show like this, but Mother Nature could definitely use a good PR agent to sway the public to her side. The old adage about a picture being worth 1,000 words is a tired one, but it nevertheless rings true in a photo or video's persuasive potential. People tend to be more likely to care about something when they can see it, especially if it's presented in a surprising or unprecedented way. Places like the Great Barrier Reef and the Serengeti have plenty of videographers and photographers who have made their entire careers out of telling stories about their ecological richness. But freshwater? Despite being critically important to all life, rivers, lakes, and streams have been more or less overlooked by documentarians. In this episode, however, you'll meet the founder of Freshwaters Illustrated, Jeremy Monroe, a nature filmmaker extraordinaire who decided more than 20 years ago to create a studio whose mission was to show people the unseen, unexpected, and unbelievable beauty that lies just below the surface of waterways most people fail to notice, even when they're literally in their own backyards. This is a good discussion, and I'm delighted to shine a spotlight on Jeremy and his work. So let's get to it, shall we? On with the podcast. Thank you for joining us for another episode of the Podcast Aquatic, the official podcast of the Tennessee Aquarium. Today, I have a very special guest, someone I have actually wanted to get on the show for quite a long time. Jeremy Monroe is the director at Freshwaters Illustrated, which is a freshwater aquatic life-focused film or studio. So, but if I've incorrectly described that, Jeremy, please correct me. But thank you for joining us on the show today.
Thanks for having me.
All right, well, let's start by introducing Freshwaters Illustrated. You'll do a better job, I'm sure, of explaining it and summarizing what exactly your mission is and what you do better than I just did. So what is Freshwaters Illustrated and why does it exist?
Yeah, so Freshwaters Illustrated, we're a nonprofit organization, and we have this mission of raising public awareness of freshwater life, science, conservation, and culture. And we mostly do that through documentary films. And we've been doing it for a little over 20 years now. And the premise for this organization, the need we were looking to fill was really what certainly at the time when we were founded was kind of a lack of storytelling, a lack of imagery around freshwater biodiversity, freshwater conservation stories. And so that was really the motivation for this organization. And it's carried us through 20 years of storytelling, like I said, mostly through short films, here and there a feature film, lots of imagery. And we hope it carries us through another 20 or 40 more.
Well, I hope so too, because the work that you do is honestly it's incredible. And one thing that is kind of surprising, I think, once you've actually seen a Freshwaters Illustrated, or I might just shorten this to FI, I don't know if that's okay moving forward just for brevity's sake, but one of the great things about the work that you do is you offer people these views of these amazing animals that are often overlooked even by people who live cheek and jowl with them, who drive over the streams that they're in every day, that might live on a property that stream flows through and have no idea that that those animals are there. And I think there's this, I feel like, and maybe you can correct me if I'm wrong, but there's this sensation or this sense or opinion among a lot of people that there aren't stories to tell there. Because people aren't telling those stories, I guess there's this assumption that, well, streams just aren't interesting. And I don't think anything could be further from the truth. And all you have to do is watch some of FI's films to see how amazing these animals are that you just have no idea are even there.
Right. A lot of times the question that I ask myself is, do we look at rivers, streams, wetlands? Do we look at these really as ecosystems, kind of societally? A lot of times we look at marine ecosystems where you can say the word coral reef and somebody, whether or not they apply a term like biodiversity or ecosystem, that sort of concept and aesthetic is there, that there's a lot of life there. There's a lot of interaction going on. There's a lot of relationships. Um, but yeah, like you said, when it comes to those creeks that might be in our backyards, the ones that we know uh, so closely, I think there is this underestimation of what's going on underneath that surface. And so, whether that's the behavior of a fish, a salamander, a mussel, and that's something that we lean into with every one of our films, and we ask ourselves, how do we bring people underneath the surface of these waters? And what one of the ultimate, kind of motivations is, if we're doing our jobs really well, we want people to ask the question to themselves of, oh, why haven't I snorkeled this? Why haven't I brought my snorkel mask down to the creek yet?
Yeah, I mean, snorkeling a creek, even growing up in East Tennessee, as I've done, my family's been here for generations, and I mean, I swam in plenty of creeks, like you mentioned. I swam in a lot of rivers. I mean, in Knoxville, where I grew up, there you don't have to drive very far at all to get to the Smoky Mountains. So I spent a lot of weekends, wading in just and rafting down a lot of these creeks. I don't think it ever occurred to me to stick my head under the water and open my eyes. And if I had, I would have just been astonished. And one neat thing about your films is that you're able to show people something that even if they were to do that, even if they were to open their eyes and under the water, the likelihood is they might see some of these animals and think, oh, well, it's amazing, but they wouldn't see some of the behaviors that you're able to capture because you mentioned coral reefs earlier, and I think that there are these hot spots, right, where people focus their efforts when it comes to nature documentaries. You think of things like the Serengeti or the Amazon or the Great Barrier Reef. Those are places that we think that's where those stories are happening. But I would put the behavior of how mussels propagate up against leopards dragging an antelope into a tree in the middle of the African plains any day in terms of just sheer what the heck amazement. And I think your films do a great job of capturing those moments that even if you were lucky enough or had the presence of mind to stick your head underwater with a snorkel mask on, you might see those things, but you wouldn't necessarily see the kinds of things that you see in your films.
Right. So yeah, I think right now I would bet that, 75, 100 people are swimming in a swimming hole in the Smoky Mountains right now on a river like the Little River. Um, and maybe a handful of those people have snorkel masks on. Um, and I hope that every one of those people sees like, wow, there's a lot of fish swimming around here. There's a lot going on. And I look at the bottom of this pool and I see these bigger guys, and here's all these ones that are swimming around me. But when it comes to capturing behaviors, there are always behaviors to see, and that's just a matter of time. How long do you want to spend? But a lot of the neat behaviors are kind of rare, and you have to encounter them at certain times. And sometimes it's not the height of summer, especially for fish. If you get into the springtime when the water's a little bit colder, there's not as many of us out there swimming or even snorkeling. That's when we see some of the coolest stuff. And of course, fish get really colored up when they're doing uh, those kind of behaviors. So that's where we lean on our biology background and the network of biologists that we work with to learn about these areas. And so we are out there sometimes in July and August, right out there with everyone else swimming. And, the kids are asking us, what are you doing with those cameras? And sometimes we don't look like your traditional creek swimmers. But a lot of times we're out there earlier in like April, May. We're in dry suits because the water's cold and we're in it for 6 or 8 hours. And that's when we're really tuned in to these certain behaviors that we're anticipating, we've kind of studied about, and we're hoping to capture. You mentioned freshwater mussels. I'll say that's one of the most challenging behaviors we've ever tried to capture, and one of the reasons for that is just simply water clarity. Freshwater mussels live in larger rivers that tend to be not quite as clear for really good photography or cinematography. And so, not only did we have to tune into the seasonality of when those behaviors occurred, but we actually had to wait for certain years when, they were almost like drought years when the water got really low and it had been a really long time since the last rainstorm. And that's when we got those, few moments that we really spent a lot of time sort of capturing imagery of. to build sequences like you saw in Hidden Rivers and that are on display at the Tennessee Aquarium.
Yeah, we should. I should tie this back in since this is the official podcast of the Tennessee Aquarium. If you're visiting the aquarium, you actually can see some, and you might not even realize if you've been here before that you are responsible for some of the footage that people have seen when they visit. If you're in our Register Rivers gallery, which opened a couple years ago, you can see some clips like we were just talking about of that mussel propagation and some of the insane behaviors that they do, the wily tricks that they use to lure fish in before literally just spraying them with their babies. And we talked about this in a past episode of the podcast, all about mussels on Galentine's Day. It was our mussel centric podcast. And then if you go further into the building in River Journey, you can see a reel that I think you created for us that highlights our conservation work that's in our tiny but mighty important gallery. Do you remember that working on that project, Jeremy?
Yeah, yeah. And, for us, the Tennessee Aquarium, ever since we sort of set the southeastern region and the southern Appalachian region as a priority for our work, which we did pretty early, the Tennessee Aquarium was one of our first partners. So, of course, Anna George, who ran the Tennessee Aquarium Conservation Institute for many years, she, had been a partner and helped us sort of get our heads around what the aquarium was doing, whether that was um, lake sturgeon conservation, which we went out on many lake sturgeon releases and brook trout conservation, and we tagged along on a lot of those trips. Um, and so I think it was probably 2014 or 15 that we helped the aquarium make a couple short educational videos. And so I think one of those was focused on brook trout reintroduction, and one of those was kind of a general, just about that. Yeah, if you've gone to the Tennessee Aquarium, like many, many people have, not only in Chattanooga area, but far beyond, um, there's so much to look at and so much to take in. You might miss that there's a really important part of the aquarium that's out there doing conservation work every day. And every year that work has gotten better and better because the investment and the people that are there. And of course, not many people will get to go to the what I'll still call it the new Conservation Institute across the river because you'd have to be there on a special tour or a certain day. But there's a equally impressive facility for the Conservation Institute now that's right across the river that hopefully there's that's I'm sure that's being covered in the podcast and other media, but it's something that sort of could be missed with when you're taking in everything at the aquarium. But it's like I said, for us, those are the biologists, those are those communities of people that are doing remarkable, important work every day, and so naturally they work into our stories and into our imagery, and I'm proud that that the I'm proud that culminating film that we produced in the Southeast called Hidden Rivers really shines a bright spotlight on the work of Tennessee Aquarium and other conservation organizations.
Yeah, it was actually while we were doing one of those Southern Appalachian brook trout releases, I think, when I first met you. And I don't even know if you remember having met me, but I rode up with you to one of the release sites. It was very early in my aquarium career, about probably 8 years ago. And yeah, that was such a that was such an interesting time because I got to kind of pick your brain. I make a lot of the videos covering our conservation work here at the aquarium, so I've always held my stuff up and in comparison to yours, and always found it, wanting, obviously, but I always hold you as something to strive for and aspire to. Freshwaters Illustrated just does such an amazing job of making these places that people don't see, don't even know about, just look almost magical. You show these things that, again, I think they're so invisible and unappreciated, and they should be visible and appreciated. I think you're doing a great job of doing that. But I remember when we were driving up to the release site, I was picking your brain. I think you mentioned at one point that you had done a special course. I feel like it was in Wyoming or Montana or somewhere to learn how to do documentary filmmaking because I was looking at your LinkedIn earlier to try and remind myself. And the only thing that's on there is that you went to Colorado State University and that you have a master's in aquatic ecology, fish biology. I don't see anything on there about your background in filmmaking. So can you kind of give me a bit of a background for you? How did you get into filmmaking, and how did that world of filmmaking intersect with your obvious interest and academic study of fish?
Yeah, well, yeah, I ended up in college at Colorado State University studying fishery biology, and so that kind of came from me growing up as just a fishing kid, a really obsessed fishing kid, and so I was lucky to have a mom who took me out to the lakes and outside Denver, Colorado, where I grew up, and sometimes back to Minnesota, where she grew up, and I got to sort of interact with this world as a lot of people do with a rod and reel, and so that led me to to fishery biology, which is how a lot of people get into that field. I really wanted to learn more about those fish that I was sort of pursuing and how those are managed. Um, and it was when I was in college when I started to just get exposed to this much broader world way beyond those fish, especially those handful of game fish that I was interested, the trout, the bass, the perch, the bluegill, and into this world of whether it's darters or suckers or minnows, um, and then even beyond that into the world of invertebrates like mussels and aquatic insects. And so aquatic insects are actually what I studied in my master's, and I just fell in love with them. And I spent my master's research was on these mountain stream insects that I could do behavioral observations of. So I was kind of spying their little behaviors and their habitat relationships in these shallow riffles in the headwaters of the Colorado River. And there was a lot of visual work, and I was doing my best to document it through the tools of science. Um, but I was able to convince my professor at the time to get the lab an underwater camera, or at least a camera with sort of a glorified Ziploc bag that I could put around it. I started I started capturing images of those little insects, and it was pretty immediate the impact I could see that those images had, especially when I sort of compared them to all this work I'd done to quantitatively document, you know, who lives where and what do they do and how do they interact and how do they partition the space and minimize competition. I did my best, but all of a sudden I had these images that did a lot of the talking for me. And then, I was talking about animals like caddisfly larvae, mayfly larvae, stoneflies, things that not many people have seen. Certainly, if you're not a fly fisher person, you may not be aware of these. And then seeing those animals underwater is even less likely. So these underwater images I could see pretty quickly were powerful. And I also was able to, through exploring photography, kind of rediscover this side of me that I wasn't really exploring in science. And that was kind of this artistic storytelling side that I'd had. So by the time I finished uh, my graduate degree and wrote my thesis, which I loved, and I just felt so fortunate to do that, I had kind of already mentally made this shift into, I think I need to get back into storytelling. And meanwhile, I'd been exposed to this a world of freshwater biodiversity, and certainly a lot of the freshwater conservation need that's out there. And not only saw that this is a better use of my skill set, but I think this might be something the world needs a little bit more than my science. And and then the joy was really saying how do we do that? And so I saw this as very mission driven organization. Um, and so we founded this nonprofit in 2003, started writing grants to do our first projects and got lucky. And, some of those grants came through and we were sort of off and running pretty quickly. And then along the way, we were able to work with great people. So one of those people is Dave Harasimchuk. He's our lead senior cinematographer and photographer. Dave spends tons of time underwater, and he's been with us since about 2010. And so those images that you might see in a film like Hidden Rivers or Water from the Mountain or The Last Dragons, that's a lot of Dave's, blood, sweat, tears, and every other things that that really goes into the beauty of those films. And then we've got the rest of our crew, whether that's our a sound designer, Matt Kellum, who's been with us for years, and then other folks that we work with who are out there in the sort of growing underwater, freshwater photography and video communities. So yeah, you asked about a degree in filmmaking. How did that come about? Well, I went and looked at a master's in fine arts at Montana State University, which had a brand new program in about 2003 in science and natural history filmmaking. I said, "Wow, this sounds perfect." Well, when I went and visited, I could see that it was brand new. It was going to cost me a lot of money. And so this was right about the time that the internet was starting to be a little bit more dependable for asking, questions on forums. Um, you know, I had a whole, I started buying books on filmmaking, and my brother at the time was actually going to film school, so I was able to look over his shoulder a little bit. Um, so yeah, uh, I kind of homeschooled myself on the filmmaking part, and I like to say that I get a little less incompetent every day.
Well, I think there are a lot of people who I think it's a totally legitimate approach these days to attend what they call YouTube U. So many people, including me, I mean, everything I know about making videos came from being self-taught on and figuring things out on Adobe Premiere, but a lot of it was basically working yourself into a corner, knowing that you needed to do something, then having to go online and figure out, how do I make this work? How do I make the software do what I need it to do? That it's interesting that your approach kind of predates that becoming more normal, but it's a totally legitimate, I think, approach to learning how to do filmmaking these days.
Yeah, and you mentioned YouTube. When we started, we thought we'd just be doing what we saw on PBS. We're gonna make, you know, hour-long or half-hour documentaries for people to watch on television. The internet wasn't even really carrying video at that time, or wasn't carrying it really well. We were still getting our Netflixes in the mail.
That's going to blow a lot of younger listeners' minds that
Yeah,
Netflix used to be discs.
yeah. Um, so just after starting up in 2003, 2004, and within a few years, that whole world changed. Yeah, there is a YouTube. You can upload anything, whether it's an hour-long film, or it turns out these 5-minute films are fantastic and a lot more watchable on the internet and down and streamable. And so that really was the thing that we had to catch up to, and probably the whole film world and media world had to catch up to, was what how do we use the internet and eventually social media to carry this content. And I think you find, especially these days, that short format content was not the thing that we saw from the get-go, but it's the thing we had to learn how to do really quickly.
It's interesting that you mentioned that you have this background in studying aquatic macroinvertebrates, because I guess it makes a lot of sense now that I look at your logo and it's a mayfly emerging from the water, right?
That's right. Yeah, yeah. And I think mm, I'm sure when people look at our logo, there's some people that say, "Oh, there's a dragonfly," or I see the fly," but you caught on that there's a whole process, and we look at that as symbolic of aquatic insects have this just remarkable life history and life cycle where uh, most aquatic insects have a larval form that's underwater, like a dragonfly or a mayfly nymph, and then at some point they emerge out of the water and become this winged adult. And then they go find a mate, and the females come back and lay their eggs in the water. So that's quite a life cycle. And I think it's indicative of what you said earlier about that's just sort of hidden wonder or that surprise factor that's in that little swamp in your backyard or that little creek that runs near the park. That's happening right now. A caddisfly is, coming out of its, little pupal case and going up to the water surface and shaking the water off those wings and flying around. And I just think of that as not only symbolic, but just profound. And I'm jealous because in my wildest dreams, I get to have either gills or wings. And aquatic insects, many of them get to have both in one lifetime. That's pretty remarkable.
Yeah, it's funny. A lot of this conversation probably would have gone over my head, except for that we recorded an episode of the podcast focused on macroinvertebrates. And so I know about things like caddisflies and Dobson flies and a lot of these things that you're talking about because and the beauty of it is and the I guess the serendipity or the how nicely it dovetails with your mission is that so much of the interesting part of their life happens out of our view unless again you stick your head under the water and you've got a very close focusing camera and a good snorkel mask. You're not going to see a lot of the interesting things that they're doing before the week or two that they're out and out, looking for mates and laying eggs. You appreciate the tiniest sliver of their lives, and then most of it happens out of sight.
Yeah. Yeah, and one of the neat things is, and I learned this when I was doing that thesis research, was bug watching is about 30% better underwater than it is above water at a minimum. So one, you just have river ecosystems that are incredibly productive. They bring in all these nutrients from the landscape. There's a whole community of organisms and a whole food web that's just perfectly adapted to making use of all that material, whether that's sunlight, whether that's the leaves that fall off all those beautiful Appalachian broadleaf trees. There's all these organisms that make hay, munching all that stuff up, and then of course a lot of those become food for fish, and on up the food chain into birds and otters and lots of other things. So you have these freshwater environments that are just remarkably productive. There are a lot of animals. If you pick up a stone in a riffle in a small creek, you'll just be amazed at the stuff that's sort of sliding around and crawling around on it. It's different than if you picked up a rock in the forest and maybe you found that one or two spiders or, pill bugs or whatever underneath. Um, so you've got that diversity. Well, the other cool thing that happens is when you're snorkeling, or even if you're looking through like a tube, some people use something called like a benthoscope or a stream viewer. It's almost like snorkeling without getting your body in the water. You just look through a tube with a little glass lens at the end. Well, just like your snorkel mask, if that lens is flat, everything gets magnified. And so anybody who's been underwater and sort of looked at their hands or their feet and said, gosh, everything looks a little bigger under here. That's what happens with bugs too. And so when you get in that riffle, let's say you're in the Hiwassee River, um, and you're looking around for fish, and yeah, they're there, and some of them are coming right to you. One of the reasons they're coming to you is you're disturbing some of those insects, and they are really smart about saying, "Hey, if you're gonna kick up some insects, I'm gonna hang out with you." But then if you just pause and you just start looking around and looking down and like looking at those rocks, you'll see things that, gosh, you know, there's no other way to experience them than seeing them. Those insects doing what they're doing on those rocks. They might be sitting there grazing algae. They might have built in, some of these caddisflies can spin silk. And so they might have built, uh, this woven web to capture material that comes through the current. Um, and then you'll see these predators that are going around looking for other insects like little dragonfly larvae or those Dobson fly larvae, like you mentioned. So it's this neat world that I got to know uh, through science, but I've just come to appreciate it as it's just as watchable wildlife as you'll find anywhere else in the world. And oftentimes it is not far from your backyard or right down the block or right into the forest.
The Tennessee Aquarium's Podcast Aquatic is made possible by support from the Tennessee Conservationist, the official magazine of Tennessee state parks. Each issue is filled with fascinating stories about Tennessee's native species, rich history, and unique culture. It's also your guide to exploring state parks and planning your next outdoor adventure. Subscribe today at tnconservationist.org. When I'm out with my kids and we're hiking along trails along these creeks, I always tell them, you've got to look big. You have to appreciate the mountains and the beautiful forest that's around you. But it's also really important to look small. Like there are just as many interesting things to see when you're looking big as when you're looking small. So it's good to flip over the rock or and put it back, obviously, but flip over a log, look what's under there, and not just gloss over because you're so appreciative of the fact that these beautiful mountains are on the horizon. You got to appreciate the dirt at your feet too. So I think your films do just an amazing job of focusing in on those things that I think people would, if they even knew to look for it, they still might just overlook it. So that's the beauty of FI's films, I think, is that it really makes you appreciate something that you didn't even know was so cool in the first place. And I wanted to look. I was looking at your mission statement because I figured you must have one. And on the website it says that FI is about raising public awareness about the life, study, and conservation of freshwater ecosystems through immersive visual media and storytelling, and sharing imagery and stories with educators, conservation groups, and community audiences. I was looking at one of the clips because a lot of the videos that you've done, or at least segments of them, are available on your Vimeo page, which I will link in the show notes so people can check them out. But in one of the short films, A Deeper Creek, you feature an interview with Jim Herrig, who we've worked with. I've met him and done some things with him as well. He's an aquatic biologist with the U.S. Forest Service, and he talks about the best way he could figure to get people an appreciation of just how much and diverse the life is in the streams around here, so around Southern Appalachia, was to get them into it and show it to them firsthand. And that makes me think: do you feel like FI is moving the needle in that respect? You're kind of giving people this snorkeler's perspective without having to put on the wetsuit, the dry suit, and put on the mask, and showing people these animals that they didn't know existed or that they've never seen if they did know they existed. Do you feel like you're helping to kind of move that needle through the work that you do?
I think so, and I think we've heard enough from folks who have seen these films to kind of affirm that yeah, that is happening. And I'll say the place where it's happening more than anywhere is there in the southeast, in that southern Appalachian region. So not only did you have great programs that were started by Jim Herrig and the Forest Service to start, and the Tennessee Aquarium to get people out in these streams. Um, and snorkeling them, and then there with a biologist who can tell you what you're seeing, and point you to a really cool thing that they're seeing in a certain part of the stream. So but southern Appalachian streams are pretty accessible. The water's cool up in the mountains. You've got big, especially in East Tennessee and Western North Carolina, you've got big chunks of public land, uh, big healthy watersheds. And it turns out, you can look at a stream from a bridge and you might say, oh, that looks clear. Well, when you get in the water with a snorkel mask, you might find out that it's not quite as clear as it seemed. And maybe you might have a couple feet of visibility, even in what you'd call a clear stream. And so freshwater snorkeling does need really clear water. And so for that, in it either needs, a spring. Those are helpful for getting nice clear water, but really the best thing are just big protected, well-managed forests. And so East Tennessee, Western North Carolina, North Georgia has a lot of that. And so you've got these cool mountain streams, but they're not ice cold. And so it's kind of this sweet spot, and it's probably related to one of the reasons why there's so much biodiversity in those streams too. It's like you've got lots of habitat, you've got mountains, you've got these complex systems, you've got these uh, you know canyon, crooked streams, but just like the evolutionary biologists will tell you that yeah, that a lot of our species were able to kind of weather the glaciation periods because we never had that extensive ice sheeting or glaciation. Um, I kind of equate that to, from a snorkeler standpoint, it does never get, uh, really cold, especially in spring and summer. Wintertime, it's going to be really cold out in those streams. So I feel like the Southern Appalachian streams are some of the most approachable waters to go into a mountain stream, and have it be comfortable enough to maybe swim without a wetsuit for a little while. If you're in for more than, maybe 15, 20 minutes or a half hour, you're probably going to want a wetsuit pretty quick
Oh
in
yeah.
some of the mountain streams. And we're out there in dry suits almost all year long because we just sit in one place for, 4 or 6 hours and we still get cold.
Wow.
But But all to say that there's just something special, just the biodiversity alone in the Southern Appalachian region, but the fact that it's accessible. You've had these pioneering programs with the Forest Service, the Tennessee Aquarium, and then we've had these opportunities to just capture that. You know, one of the sort of the main character of our Hidden Rivers film is somebody that Jim hired, a Chattanooga local, Casper Cox.
Casper Cox. He's
And
notorious.
yeah, and Casper, in that film, he really is the person that you follow and connect to sort of get you tuned into why would you do this? What, how would you do it? What would you find when you did it? And what then would you be driven to do? And how might your life change? Um, and it's just no wonder and no coincidence that that all happened. And somebody like Casper is, living within miles of the Tennessee Aquarium, a place that I know inspired him. And he says in the film, well, I guess it was about 20 years ago, or I can't remember the time, but the Tennessee Aquarium had advertised a river snorkeling trip. So, all of this is related, but it's no wonder that there's this snorkeling movement that we've been able to help grow. It's no wonder that the world's and certainly the country's finest freshwater aquarium is there in Chattanooga. And when we show that Hidden Rivers film, one of those testaments is the first question, almost invariably, the first question we get is, where can I go snorkeling around here? And we just hear that constantly of like, yeah, we went out and got our snorkel gear right after we saw that film, and we're already planning our summer trips. So to me, that is probably not only one of the best outcomes, but one of the best things that can happen is for someone to sort of reconnect to a place they thought they knew, that they've always known, that's familiar, but to do it in this new way. And, when you do that, you have that same experience that Casper has. You might start asking questions like, oh gosh, or this is beautiful. I didn't know there was this much, life in here. And, oh, well, there's a piece of trash. What? That's, here's a can from the 1970s. Oh, but darn it, here's a bottle from, last year. It's a Rockstar can or something, Um, so those little awakenings that happen once you're connected to that environment and once you're connected to it as an ecosystem, I have a lot of trust that just going out and snorkeling will lead to other ways to sort of know, explore, and care and act for these beautiful ecosystems that turn out are our life support system. And the more of us that are out there thinking about them, tracking them, monitoring them, and taking care of them, the better for all of us.
Yeah, I think one of the things that's so powerful about film, and one of the reasons why I think it's so unfortunate that so few people have, taken FI's approach of focusing on freshwater, is that science in a vacuum can be kind of it doesn't really sway people. So, and when people don't care, they don't act. And so our scientists oftentimes appreciate when we go out and we document the work that they're doing, because they can do great work. But if the only people they're talking to are other academics and they're not communicating to the common person and showing them, this is this amazing animal, and this is why this animal, how beautiful it is, and where it lives, and this is why it's worth protecting, they're not gonna care. And I think one of the good things about FI is that it gives people a reason to care by, if nothing else, than just a surface level appreciation of, wow, that is a beautiful, beautiful fish, or wow, that is just, who knew that mussels did that? Or I've never seen a hellbender. I've heard of a hellbender, but look at how they move underwater. Like I think from the outside looking in, what you do is you're giving people a reason to care. You're making them interested, and through that interest, they suddenly, like you mentioned, they suddenly care about an ecosystem they didn't even know existed before they pressed play.
I sure hope so. And, certainly now we can just see that we're not at our best of times for supporting science. And there's times where I worry that, yeah, in addition to all of the other narratives and competing factors that are out there, that, you're right, that in some sense, science has operated traditionally in this somewhat isolated way. And oftentimes in our film, that's what we're really trying to sort of bridge is that connection because just like you've spent a day out with the Tennessee Aquarium Conservation Institute, out doing something in the field, it's hard not to care when you're out with somebody like that. Yeah, they're a scientist. They have a different discipline and training than you. And even if you don't understand every word or concept, you could see that not only do they care and they are working to understand, but they're out there doing it. And so that science in a vacuum, like you mentioned, we're in a world now where that we we should be really careful about that, and we've got these opportunities to shine light on, like, yeah, this is what a freshwater biologist does, or this is what a conservation biologist does. This is what somebody who has found recreational snorkeling, your next door snorkeler, this is how they found it. So whether it's a scientist, a conservationist, sort of an everyday steward or hero, that's what we love about what we do is in essence it's what all journalists and documentarians do. It's this is something that people should have an opportunity to learn about. And now we do have you know uh, an internet, a YouTube that where we can kind of follow our nose and learn things in lots of different disciplines. So that's gives us all the more motivation to produce these stories. And then when we do that, how can we make them as immersive, as compelling, as real as they can be? And we have our, you know, little cheat sheet. Our four rules of FI filmmaking are, have fun, be safe, make it real, and make it beautiful. And that's what we try to do, I think. And most of our best work, we're hitting those marks. And yeah, I want you to not only uh, be underwater, see how that hellbender moves, and just have a moment of awe and wonder that, wow, I share the planet with this creature. And along with that, you might see the person who has dedicated their life to making sure that hellbenders are around for generations to come and trying to grapple with the very real and sometimes grim realities that are facing not only an animal like hellbenders, but lots of our freshwater ecosystems that we tend to have a really, really heavy footprint on. So we don't, I always say that, we don't really make environmental films like the ones that a lot of people think of, like the ones that may depress you and dishearten you. We try to make films that really key in on wonder, and which our rivers and creeks and wetlands and lakes have in spades, and then take that wonder and bring it into a place where you can learn how to care, learn how to know, and maybe follow a model of like, wow. And with something like Hellbenders, for example, we made a film called The Last Dragons. And one of the simple messages in that, there were kind of two. One was, hey, silt and mud aren't good for streams if there's too much of it. And that turns out to be one of the biggest problems, nationwide, worldwide, in running waters. Um, but then the other thing was this thing that almost all of us have done, which is playing with rocks when we go to the creek. And sometimes we might make a little tub for ourselves or a little kiddie pool, and we might start getting really ambitious and stacking up big rocks.
Hmm.
Well, if you're in one of these diverse streams, especially in the southern Appalachians, you're probably messing with a lot of habitat when you do that. And some of that habitat, especially when you get into those bigger stones, might be a hellbender's home. It might be a little nest for a tiny catfish called a mad tom.
Hmm.
It may have been a whole neighborhood for a bunch of these aquatic insects. So there are these actions that we can do, and there's these actions that we can sort of resist or not do. Um, that may have seemed benign before, but once you're tuned into this world, you might say, "Yeah, gosh, I love swimming, and I've always made those little uh, pools and stacked little rocks and made little decorative cairns, but I'm not going to do that anymore because I learned about these hellbenders or these mussels or these mad toms that need that, and I don't need to make cairns to enjoy myself on the stream, but they darn sure need their homes to stay in the stream."
One of my favorite examples of what you were talking about with trying to make people feel kind of connected in a joyful way without being depressing is the March of the Newts, which is one of the later. I think it's maybe your latest film in your portfolio on the website. Which remind me of the URL so that people can find it.
Yeah, so Freshwaters Illustrated is our website. You can find a lot of our stuff there. We do have a YouTube channel, and that's just at Freshwaters Illustrated, and Instagram is the same thing. And then our Vimeo, I believe you can get there just by Googling Vimeo Freshwaters Illustrated, or it's at We May Fly, I believe.
Yeah. I looked, it's freshwatersillustrated.org. So if you're looking up, it's freshwatersillustrated.org. But March of the Newts is just such a great example of that hopeful, optimistic, joyful approach to making people feel that connection with nature because it's, I was sharing this around with our team earlier through our Teams chat. And I love it because for the first 4 minutes or so of it, it's literally just beautiful imagery of these golden colored newts, and I don't remember what the species is. You'll have to forgive me, but the whole piece is really about, I guess, people helping people feel this connection with the newts, and through that, caring about the fact that they, like a lot of amphibians, are subject to or potentially vulnerable to BSAL, which is that's wiping out a lot of amphibian populations worldwide. And I think at the time of the film's creation, it had not made its way to North America. Has that changed since then?
To my knowledge, I don't believe so.
Okay, good.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
it does make people feel that sense of connection, and I think that's a good example of the kind of approach you're talking about because it really is. You could just enjoy it. There's no narration. There's some messages that are overlaid towards the latter half of the piece, but the first part of it is literally just fun music and this absolutely stunning footage of these newts from so close up that you can appreciate the wrinkles in their skin and the way that their digits splay out when they're in the water. It's a beautiful film, and it really does. It makes you feel a happy connection with nature, even as you're ultimately learning that there is this threat to their existence that you can do through your own actions something to mitigate.
Yeah, yeah. So that was a fun one, and that was really Dave's project that he sort of worked on for years. And he found this population of these rough-skinned newts here in Oregon, and every winter it's ice cold when they do their sort of breeding behaviors. But he would go out and still goes out, spends time with these newts and captures this what's really comical footage. Like when you swim with newts underwater, they're interested in you. They're in their kind of breeding behaviors, so they're a little bit more interactive
Hmm.
um, than they otherwise would be. And then sometimes you can witness what biologists call like newt balls, because like many amphibians, they do this kind of congregating style breeding where you just see this almost confusing just mass of like wriggling newts and or salamanders in some cases. Well, so yeah, he had worked on that for years, and we knew it was going to be kind of funny because it's just some of the behaviors there. They, newts have arms and legs. They have big eyes. They have a mouth. They almost smile at you.
They're really cute.
Almost, they're cute and almost like cartoon like. And then they're doing these behaviors that were just, not only interesting but sort of comical. Well, all the while that biologist community and this really focused group of amphibian biologists was watching this B-Sal disease, similar to like the chytrid that had an impact on a lot of frog and toad populations worldwide. Well, this B-Sal was really something that was starting to hit salamander populations, which is really worrisome if you live in North America because we are the global hotspot of salamanders. And of course, Casey, you're sitting right in
In the heart
you
of it.
know, the heart of it there in the Smokies and the Southern Appalachian region, and we have a lot here in the West too. Nowhere near as many species. Well, as Dave was working on this film, we had just started to learn more about this, and we said, "Gosh, this we thought this would just be kind of a whimsical, fun film, but we probably need to let folks know that there is this threat that's out there that we don't want to see happen. And again, there are things that we can do, like being conscious when we travel internationally if we're going to some of these habitats. And Admittedly, those are hard rules to follow. Is everyone going to wash their boots after they get back from the Dolomites? And, you know, and then go up to the Smokies in the next week? And, how real is that threat of transmitting disease? Well, a lot of the biologists are really worried that it can be that simple. Um, and so, yeah, I think that film, like you said, is a good example of bring somebody in, almost make them forget themselves and have as much sympathy and empathy as they can for the world of a rough-skinned newt. And if you have them there, maybe they're in the most receptive place to sort of hear a message like, hey, let's keep these guys doing what they're doing and being the beautiful creatures that they are and living their amazing lives by being careful when we travel internationally and being careful when we go from sort of wetland to wetland or watershed to watershed.
So people probably watch the videos like the March of the Newts or Hidden Dragons or Hidden Rivers or what was the one about dragons? I forget.
Oh, the last
The
dragons.
Last
Yeah.
Dragons, that's right. And they wonder how in the world do you get these kinds of this kind of footage? I mean, is it literally just being lucky? Is it knowing the water and waiting, like you said, for ideal conditions? Do you just have to have saint like patience? I mean, how do you get it? And I'm asking almost for my own edification because I've tried to get those shots. I've gone out with our people, and even at the best of times, I can maybe get 50% to the point that you get in your films and showing the kinds of things that you show.
Yeah. Well, it's a lot of those things. Certainly, patience and time in the water is the biggest thing. That network of biologists is really useful for us because, especially the conservation biologists who might work for a state or federal agency or a nonprofit like Tennessee Aquarium or Conservation Fisheries. Um, they're really tuned in to maybe where things happen, and sometimes they might know, especially like hellbender biologists, mussel biologists, um, and some fish biologists do a lot of snorkeling, so they also know about water clarity. And usually those are our two questions, like, do you know where we might find good populations, healthy populations of these guys and in clear water? And so sometimes the coincidence of those two things is what we need, clear water and good, healthy populations. And so if it's something like hellbenders, um, you've frankly lost a lot of your opportunities decades ago, as far as we know. Um, and so it is a lot of hopping around, building trust with biologists. A lot of the biologists who monitor, for example, hellbender populations aren't likely to tell you where their healthiest populations are for very good reason. Those populations are vulnerable and they don't need any more, you know, potential introduction of disease or uh, um, pressure or stress on those populations. Well, building trust with those biologists is key because um, you know, we're lucky when we get to the point where they say, "Yeah, I'll take you out to one of my sites." And sometimes that is where we say, "Yes, this is where we'll be able to capture these kinds of behaviors." And we'll think about the last 10 places we were, and we're like, "Gosh, we won't film there again." um, and then just because, yeah, you think you're seeing something good, and then you see something really good, and you're like, okay, yeah, this is where we would do it. And you kind of feel like sometimes you're like, gosh, is this like time traveling, like seeing what these healthy populations were? And you have to ask yourself, how many other places were like this when a lot of these watersheds were, you know, a lot more healthy, 2, 3, 400 years ago, and or earlier. Um, so yeah, there's that, and then there's that time spent, and sometimes we just get lucky. We do stumble upon things that even we'll tell biologists like, "Gosh, have you seen this?" or "Have you been to this little tributary?" And they might say, "No, that wasn't on our radar." Um, so it's a little bit of both. We were lucky to spend enough time in the Southern Appalachian rivers between about 2010 and 2020 to really get to know a few streams really well, certainly in East Tennessee. And yeah, we would. we would get little tips from biologists, and then we would sometimes just get enormously lucky. And then there's the things that you'll never ever anticipate. And one of the most famous images that Dave ever captured. Um, Hopefully, some of the listeners have seen it. It's a hellbender that's got in its mouth a northern water snake,
Yep.
and that happened right in the Tellico River, not too far from the town of Tellico Plains, a place that we spent a lot of time, and we knew where some of those hellbenders lived. Um, but Dave, just one day, I get a call from him, and he says, "You would not believe what I just, yeah." And a lot of people ask, "Wow, did that hellbender eat that water snake?" And no, the water snake got away. And I sort of wonder, that's probably not a really common interaction, but as much as those snakes and hellbenders are sort of, working their way under rocks, I'm sure those guys know each other and maybe they have a tussle here and there. Um,
Just bad
but
neighbors.
yeah, right. And yeah, that Dave got internationally recognized with that image because it was a finalist in the Wildlife Photographer of the Year contest.
It's incredible. That's incredible. I do want to ask as I start to wind this down. You mentioned that FI was founded 2003, so at this point you're cruising towards your 23rd anniversary, I think, in January of next year. So in that time, I mean, so much of filmmaking, and we've had filmmakers on the show before, and I've asked this question before, but I think specifically because of where you're having to do your work, maybe it's even more important than it is trying to make films out in the ocean where you have all the room to move. But has the advance of technology given you access to tools that you really would have killed to have had back in 2003 that have made opened maybe new doors and avenues for storytelling that weren't possible back in 2003 when you got started?
Yeah, the I'll say one of the big things was kind of the advance of like mirrorless cameras. So back in 2003, we would carry around big underwater video cameras that were really heavy, and I'm glad I was in my 20s at that time, because it was kind of dangerous, hauling those things up a little step pool, rocky stream in the forest. Um, and then, if you had enough, you know, uh, energy or weight or motivation, you might bring along your extra still camera. And so sometimes you wouldn't because you're like, gosh, I'm just getting video and I've got to make this decision. Well, right around 2007, 8, um, we started to see these digital SLRs um, that would start to capture video. And then pretty soon that actually all got collapsed into these new mirrorless cameras that got really compact. They captured great video, they captured great photos, and it all ended up in a we could house it all in like a nice aluminum housing, underwater housing, and it would be a third of the size of those old video cameras, and it did both video and photo for us. So that was one of the big advances. And then just, it seems like every month there's something else that comes out that's like, wow, that really could, change the way we film this. I'll say drones.
I was going to
Um,
say drones. You've done some really cool establishing shots to kind of show the places you're doing these. You're trying to show off in these films that look like they're shot with drones.
Yeah, yeah, and that's we were lucky that that kind of happened when we were working on like our Hidden Rivers film, for example, that gosh, how do you talk about watersheds and how do you talk about sort of human land use or riparian areas without that view? It's just something that's hard to get when you're got your feet on a, granite slab right next to the stream. You can get your best shot, but it might not do everything for you. And so drones, we just tend to use them almost in every one of our films now because it helps just place you. It puts these, waters where they, sort of sit in the landscape, and they, tell a heck of a lot of words for us. And then there's always just neat little approaches. GoPros have really advanced a lot of what people can capture underwater. And there's, of course, these like dunkable cameras. And the one I always tell people to get is the Pentax TG6 or TG7. Really just great underwater camera that's pretty affordable. It's not big. It fits in your pocket. It's easy to snorkel around with. It's can take, bumps and knocks. And it does a really good job at macro photography. And so there's times where we see the macro that comes off that camera and we're like, gosh, we can't do that with our really expensive cameras.
Yeah.
Um, so it is neat that, digital technology, you think about 30, 40 years ago, it was, photographers said, okay, I'm housing my camera. I'm going to put a roll of 36, frames in this camera, and I'm down diving for 36 shots, and that's all I've got. There's days where we shoot 1,500 or 2,000, maybe 2,500 photos, um, which is, you're sort of doing it because you can, but in terms of maximizing your likelihood of capturing a split second moment, you're not limited by, for example, the amount of photos you can take. So, it's the technology has made it so easy, and then on the production side, or it's made it so much easier, and on the post production side, like editing, it's I'm talking to you on a laptop right now, which is probably what I'll do our next little rough edit with. Everyone has access to a lot of editing tools now, and some of them are even free. And of course, younger generations are know how to do that naturally, and their social media platform might even offer a little video editing suite in there. So it is the technology is helping us. It's also making it to where everybody in any discipline or in any interest can make their own media. And so it is this media saturated world. And so that seems to be the challenge for a lot of us, and us especially now, is how do you kind of market this into a world that's probably got enough to watch on their phones or on their television, and you're competing with either Game of Thrones or the most viral TikTok that's ever happened that has kittens dancing.
Yeah. Well, Jeremy, I could honestly stay on and talk probably for twice as long as we've talked already. But I did want to end with letting people get a kind of glimpse into the future of FI. So what are projects that you're working on now that you're excited about? What's coming up that people should be on the lookout for?
Yeah, well, so one of the things we've really worked hard on in the last 5, 10 years is doing really taking our distribution a lot further. When we finish a big project, for example, like a Hidden Rivers film, let's make sure it not only gets out to as many communities as we can. That film, for example, premiered at the Tennessee Aquarium in 2019. Well, since then we've had by our rough count, well over 300 community screenings in places like Chattanooga, Knoxville, Atlanta, but also lots of small towns. So those community screenings are something we're working really hard on, and also uh, classroom outreach. And so we make our full film catalog totally free to anyone who's in K through 12 education. So I'll say that's one of the things we're really focused on right now, is taking our best work and making it sure it gets to the communities and classrooms that need to see it. And then in terms of production work, we're spending a lot of time in the desert Southwest and the arid Western U.S., where there's not nearly the diversity that you might find in, let's say, the Southeastern U.S., but there's just as much imperilment in terms of, desert fishes, desert amphibians that are in streams that really, water itself is in short supply, and it's whether it's through climate change or water extraction, diversion, management. A lot of these fish are right at the edge. And so that's something we've just felt compelled to say, we've got to shine a light on this and do what we can while we're able to do it. So yeah, look for more imagery films coming out from Colorado River Basin, Great Basin in the coming months and years.
It's unfortunate that you don't have to go very far to find animals that could really use a good storyteller, but I'm glad that we've got you, and I'm glad that we had the chance to pick your brain and hear more about your story and the story of FI in the course of today's discussion. So, Jeremy, thank you so much for taking the time out of your schedule to join us on the show and to shine a light on freshwater ecosystem and freshwater filmmaking, because it's definitely something that not many people are doing, and you guys do it better than anybody else I've ever seen.
Well, thank you for having me, and please pass my thanks along to everyone at the aquarium, and keep up all your great work.
Thank you for listening to today's episode. If you have any ideas for a future episode of the Podcast Aquatic, please email me at podcast@tnaqua.org. While you're online, be sure to write a review or leave us a rating. Those are both excellent and free ways to support the show. And in the meantime, until next time, remember that every drop matters.